Okay, well, so it's just, we're just take two. We'll see whatever we can. I know it's already recording. Whatever. So we're looking at a relationship chart between person C right here and person D, this mysterious individual, and we actually recorded a little bit of this before, but we had some technical difficulties because person C is apparently very popular. And so let me just catch people up on this. I'm recording a relationship chart reading because it's almost Valentine's Day, and I want to show how this works. What we found, okay, this is very crowded for folks who don't know. No, first of all, person C and person D have birth times, but we don't know what those birth times are. So there's certain things that I can't read in here. But what I read in the part that we don't have in this recording is that person C and person D might work as friends, maybe, but it's not going to be as natural as second nature. And what that's based on is that when we look at relationships in the chart, we tend to look for conjuncts, places where her planets are right next to his planets. Now, they're born within about 3 months of each other, but you can see that you say, oh, well, these are about in the same area. No, they're not. They're pretty far apart. Like more than 5 degrees is pretty far. So what we're looking for in relationships is whether her moon and his planet or whatever are close to each other, because that says that she's got an emotional tie to something about him. Now, there are actually things there that he has, but it's not a major planet. We also found that he has a moon and a Neptune together, so his mood and the vibe of the room tend to go together. There's one of those people who has a mood that permeates the entire surrounding. So when they're way up, the whole room's up. When they're way down, the whole room is down. And she has her Neptune there too, but that's a generational thing, so it doesn't really tell us much. The good thing about this is that his one-to-one interaction brings out her talent. Celine is like blessed talent. And so that's one thing. She can be empowered by this particular person. So there's a conjunct. It's a major planet and another pretty major one. But uh, as far as destiny is concerned, here's another one. She's destined, North Node, to receive not only his bond, Hera, or bonding behavior, but also his friends. So, oh, and also his bond to his friends. And so those will all go together as well. And also she has a natural affinity for counseling or being counseled or something because she's got Chiron there. But if we look at her sun and where his planets would be, you don't quite see it. So and also I went over here to the grid to see, okay, well, where do they see eye to eye in how they project themselves? Maybe you can't see that. Let me zoom in. Where do they see eye to eye in how they project themselves? It's when they're interacting one-on-one, maybe with each other. That's okay. Where do they see eye to eye emotionally? Uh-oh, octile typically means a volatile relationship of some kind. People who have moons, octile, tend to get along better when they're pushing each other around, or pushing other people around, or whatever, but this would not normally indicate a smooth relationship. And it is because of that that I concluded, she asked whether they're compatible. I say, maybe. It depends. It depends on what they're compatible over. Now, that's where we left off. The new addition to this is the friendship asteroids. Now, Armor and Annalise are pretty strong, and if I recall correctly, Annalise shows where you shine as a duo mate, and Armor shows where you make a good partner. Now, I may get these reversed, but they're both very, very good for partnerships. And when you have stuff on Armor and Annalise, that's what you tend to get with these people. So, for example, oh, I was about to say that Juno is right next to Annalise, but it isn't. Look at this. So he has Juno and Armor together, which means he tends to commit to the person that he shines as a partner with. And I want to say Armor is where people say, oh, they make a cute couple. Annalise is where people say they belong together. I may reverse those two. Now, if you've ever met people who go out there and all they do is fight, You can have two people who appear in public and all they do is fight, and folks will still say, "Oh, they make such a cute couple," right? You know that. So I believe that Annalise is the one that that does that. I'm getting these confused. Oh, they're such clones of each other. Anyway, the point is that he's got one of the friendship asteroids on his commitment, so public commitment and the public partner go hand in hand. And also, he's got his one-to-one interaction on the friend thing. So, man, this person is very much a, I want to call it a displayer. And a displayer is, well, it's the opposite of people who have, like, secret affairs and stuff. So that when this person is hooked up, you know they're hooked up. Like, the whole public knows they're hooked up. He's got his sun on one, and he's got his Juno commitment on the other. How does that affect her? Well, her Annalise is here, and we don't know that his midheaven is there, and so there's not as much on that. In fact, the nearest thing is Juno. It's about 10 degrees away, so no. And Armor, same thing. There's not anything that we can tell there, and so yeah, I can basically conclude that if you know, if I need to give this thing a thumbs up or a thumbs down, the best I can give it is a sideways thumb. Because, yeah.
That's very reassuring.
Sorry. You can always make these things work, and the way you make them work is by figuring out what planets this person actually has here on your moon, because that's what you would be emotionally invested in. Or what planets this person actually has on your sun, because that's where your one-to-one interpretation would be. But, you know, barring that, this one might be just a little bit tougher to work with. You have other questions for me?
So when you were saying earlier, as far as the moon to moon with that semi-square portion there being volatile and things like that, unless we're pushing each other or pushing others around, they seem very like introvert, very quiet. I have felt like if I'm down, they're down. If I'm happy, they're happy. So they really do feed off a lot on that. So there is a lot of fighting involved. So that's definitely on point. But what would make not that go away, but like to where it's a little bit easier? Because I have to be very conscious about like how I'm feeling or the mood around me, because if I'm not, then they're not, and then the whole house is like that, and that's really gets really tiresome.
Okay.
So what could I do to, like, on my end to make that better?
Okay. We'll see. What we have is, if we look at this, this is what you're talking about: the semi-square and the moon. So normally when you have negative, I hate to call this negative because I like to say that there is no negative in astrology, but there are some that really look negative enough. And
that's probably one of them.
the octile is notoriously the most negative that it gets, followed by the square. So this guy, the sesquiquadrant, and this guy, the semi-square, they're the same color. That's the Scorpio resonant color. And the square, you know, these blue ones, all these blue ones are, you know, they tend to be stressful. And when you have stressful aspects between major planets, the best way to make it work is to turn those stressful aspects to an outside thing. So I really think this is unfortunate, because a lot of people could get this out of astrology if they kind of knew how to spin it. In some sense, I don't want to use the word fated, but let's pretend the word is fated. Pretend that you and person D are fated to have fights when you are engaging each other emotionally. Now, there are all kinds of ways that you can play out those fights, but if you're fated to have them, doesn't mean that you have to have them with each other. And so if there is a collective struggle, or if there is some other kind of crusade that the two of you can go on together, you can connect emotionally just as easily. And in fact, you can often, because you get along, activate a bunch of other planets, like all this other stuff out in the chart, together, by turning your tension with each other towards an outward goal. So I guess my answer to your question is, if you really want to make this work, then you may be able to make it work by turning whatever tension you feel towards each other in the more negative situations, to an external target.
That's interesting. That's good to know too, because I mean that kind of would resolve a lot of the issues. Um, but at the same time, if they don't want to go anywhere and they don't want to do anything, it's kind of hard to have them have that external because of the
Okay.
introvert type feeling that they are. So
Interesting. Okay.
that makes it really hard.
So in that case, you're looking at relationship issues that aren't really rooted in your stance, but in his.
Mm.
And so we wouldn't look at your synastry chart. We look only at his chart. And there are some ways that we can probably understand him better if we only look at his chart. Now, again, we don't know his birth time, so this whole thing could roll whatever way. But we see that he's destined to be a caretaker. He's destined to bond to the people who back him. Now, I've not encountered this Hera-Bacchus conjunct very much on the node, but I imagine that because Bacchus is associated with cliques and the people who are always around you, and Hera is associated with close bonds, then having your close bonds and your cliques together on your destiny either means that you have it made socially, or it's the opposite. It means that you cling very tightly to the person that you're with. And Chiron here gives us a clue as to which one that might be. Chiron is associated with counseling and the doctor therapy kind of relationship. And so when you put those two together, you get either his best friends and his bonds are themselves therapists, or more likely for most people, he would need a kind of therapy in dealing with his best friends and his bonds. I say it's for most people because, as you can imagine, out of 100 folks, how many people are qualified to kind of get the "I'll be a therapist for you" roll down versus the ones who actually need help? It's going to be more.
So I'm better off because I do have that node as an expertise or a destiny or whatever, that the caretaker therapist role, since that's what attracts him, or that's what he needs.
What's your question?
I guess it's that, like, you're saying that his Hera and his Bacca are next to each other, so you're saying that he feeds off of needing that.
Well, maybe, and basically, I have found this with those of us whose chirons for therapy and nodes for destiny make a kind of therapy context faded. If you're born around the same time as somebody else who has a chiron node relationship, then that means you're both destined to play the doctor-therapist role, and it's very, very likely that one of you will be the doctor and one of you will be the therapist, unless you're both doctors, or you're both
therapists.
You're both in need of therapy. So that's another way of doing it. I guess, yeah, there may be an extent to which if you've got the natural node chiron thing going, then maybe you act as his sounding board or whatever. It's tough because this isn't your chart, and we can't really suggest improvements because not only is it not our right to really do that for another person, but we don't know what's going on in their mind, and they'd have to be here and kind of tell us how they saw things so we could know whether the solution lied actually here or maybe in some other part of his world. But if your partner here is displaying traits that influence your relationship in ways that are less than ideal, then it's kind of at least good to know that they have that, so you can at least I don't want to say plan around it, but you'll at least be aware of what's going on. Apparently, he has a blessed talent for being associated with a partnership because he's got Celine right next to Annalise, so that's cool. And this is interesting. He's got a whole okay. So what am I seeing here? He's got a whole Vesta focus, Juno commitment, Mercury meaning making, armor friendship thing going. So talk about a dweller.
What does it even mean?
It means somebody's really dwelling on their relationship, like really, really thinking about it. Really, really thinking about it.
So like doubtful or just like really overanalyzing?
It's probably a combination of both because his Mercury here is at the end of Virgo, and that's the vibe for meaning making. So it's the way he even makes meaning, because it's in conjunct section here, Virgo in conjunct,
Mm-hmm.
he's just got a vibe of really reflecting heavily on things. And Virgo could be analytical or it could be worry. It depends on how evolved the person is. But yeah, this is all clustered up here. So this person will probably just need a lot of assurance. And once again, we have Hera, Bacchus together. And so if he feels like he's being supported, he'll bond very deeply. He'll do the caretaking thing. And a lot of this stuff might go away, but because he's got Chiron right there, he needs to feel like he's providing some kind of therapy. And if he doesn't, then he might just like mull for a long time.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to think of like that, because they move very slow in making decisions.
Oh,
So
yeah,
you
that's
totally
that
called
Vesta.
that.
Oh,
You totally
okay.
called that on that.
Yeah, that's that Vesta focused Mercury meaning making thing going together, and it does show in here. Okay, so we've reached about the 15-minute mark in this recording. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off, but typically when we read things like this, it takes quite a while. It's about an hour, and man, there are all kinds of things I can answer. I didn't even get to the Excel table because
Right, that's a little bit more.
yeah, there's more in there, but you get the idea. We're going to go ahead and continue to read this, but for all the people in the internet world, that's how a relationship